Hey everyone, Andrew here. I'm going to be talking to you about the I.D.E.A.L investment, the I.D.E.A.L investment, which is basically just an acronym or mnemonic, I'm sorry, for why buy and hold in particular is such a great investment. Real estate in general is a great investment, but buy and hold is, in my judgment at least, the best way for any individual person, for anyone to become independently wealthy. And it's definitely something that I'd recommend at least getting to eventually in your real estate investment career. I'm going to make the case for it as well as go into some of the reasons why I think it's something that you should be looking at. How you go about it, the ins and outs of it. But first, I'm going to make the case for it. Even in a declining market, there's ways to make buy and hold work. Although you might want to use some more flipping techniques, and you do need to be more careful. We'll talk a little bit about that as well, as the market does seem to be teetering on the edge a little bit, peaking out a bit. But yeah. Oh, we've got Joshua Dorkin. The Joshua Dorkin, the man, the myth, the legend himself, has joined us. Josh, good to see you. We've got some Jared, welcome aboard. Jameer, good to see you. Lisa, hello to you as well. As far as the I.D.E.A.L acronym, or I think it's a mnemonic, it's whatever. It's 5 letters that represent 5 words, but we'll get to that very shortly as soon as a couple other people get in here as well. Bob and Ann, good to see you. Crypto JJ, I guess that's like not quite regular JJ, but kind of on the DL there a little bit. Joe, hello from Kansas City, Missouri, in my wonderful little office I have here. Let's see, we got BiggerPockets live stream going as well. Okay, excellent. Facebook's on, YouTube's good. Kevin, what's up to you as well? Carrie, well, how's it going? It looks like we got a pretty good crowd here today. So I will go ahead and get started. So I.D.E.A.L is just spells I is for income, D is for depreciation, E is for equity buildup, A is for appreciation, and L is for leverage. And there's actually a few more letters that we need to add because there's several other advantages when looking into buy and hold real estate that you should know about. So income is pretty obvious. I mean, basically you have a property, you bring in rent, that's income. If you can make more income from the property than your expenses, you've got positive cash flow. And generally speaking, there are exceptions, but generally speaking, I would only recommend, especially for new investors, to buy properties that will have a positive cash flow. And that includes with a loan on it. I even go further. Even if you're having like a private loan on the front, let's say you're doing a BRRRR strategy where you're buying the property up front, then you're doing all the work, maybe with a private loan, higher interest rate private loan, do all the work, get it rented, then refinance with a bank. Even then, I want it to cash flow with just that private loan because banks can be a little tough to nail down. Not quite sure whether or not they're going to lend to you until they actually finally do. So you always want to be careful in that way. We always want to make sure every property we have cash flows, at least on a pro forma level. I mean, you never know whether you're going to have a terrible tenant who's just going to trash the place out. Okay, that's going to ruin it for 1 year. But you should run it with conservative numbers. You know, look at the taxes, your insurance on the property. You probably won't have a lot of utilities if you're renting out a house, for example, because most of those will go on the tenant. And then, conservative maintenance and turnover expectations, as well as a recurring capital expense. I mean, on a general house, depending on where you are, it depends so much on taxes and other things. But it's generally costs at least about $4,000 a year, at least in operating expenses. Probably more like 5 or so, maybe even 6. And so you should look at, and that doesn't include your debt service or vacancy. So you need to look into that too and make sure you have a very comfortable margin because you do want your properties to cash flow. Now, if you're a more seasoned investor and you have very good reason to believe an area is going to turn around, or it's gentrifying, or there's a major new development coming in, or something like that, maybe you can, and you have other sources of cash flow, you could look into taking a small hit, per month, but it should be close. And generally speaking, I mean, as far as the vast majority of investors, I just advise just against it. We're not looking to hold for appreciation alone. Income is key going forward because, I mean, one of the things I like to say about real estate investors, especially new real estate investors, is that you're not really a real estate investor unless you're cash poor. You have a lot of equity, but you don't have any cash because real estate is probably one, well, we'll get to it. One of the big advantages / disadvantages is it requires a lot of cash. They're very large investments. You can't buy $200 of stock in a house, and so that's you want to have a consistent stream of income. They're not particularly liquid, which is actually an enormous advantage, which we'll get to shortly, soon enough. So we'll move on to the next one. By the way, if you guys have any questions on this, just let me know. I'll take breaks here from time to time to answer any questions. And so here we go. Depreciation. Depreciation is a major tax advantage that you have with buy and hold real estate. And the basically with any single family residence or residential property, the IRS considers it to have depreciated. Every 27 and a half years, it will depreciate all the way to zero. And then with commercial properties, it's 39. They might have changed this a little bit with the recent tax change. I think those are still accurate, though. If I'm wrong there, somebody correct me in the comments. But it's 27 and a half years for any residential property, 39 for any commercial property. And what this means is that each year you have a loss of 1/27 and a half of the property's value, how much you bought it for and put into capital expenses, actual repairs to the property, not operating expenses, but the actual repairs to make the property work. Those losses, now it used to be back in the day, you could count those losses against your W-2 income, your job's income. And so a lot of wealthy individuals, doctors, lawyers, etc., would just buy real estate with no intention whatsoever of having a cash flow. They just wanted that depreciation loss to count against their income. Can't do that anymore. They got rid of that in 1986. But what you can do is still counted against your real estate income as if you're a full-time investor, or just any real estate income you have. So if you make, let's say you made $10,000 during the year, but you had a property that was worth $275,000. Well, it's okay. I don't know how much detail I want to get into. It's only the property; it's not the land, and they split that out. So let's just say the property itself is $275,000. Most of it will be the building. That depreciates 1/27 and a half. That depreciates $10,000. Even though you made $10,000 in income, the IRS considers it to be a wash. You made nothing. You owe no taxes. And so we generally don't pay any income taxes. Now we pay tons in property taxes, endless amounts of property taxes. That you cannot get away from. But you can get away from a lot of your income taxes. Now, when you sell a property, you will have to recapture these imaginary losses, because generally real estate over the long run appreciates. It goes up in value. But you do have to recapture this when you sell it. Although you can also do what's called a 1031 exchange. You have 45 days to select several properties and then another 90 to close them. If you do that, you can simply transfer over this depreciation loss, and you owe no taxes on any of that. You don't have to take it back in terms of capital gains. And so this is a major tax advantage, and it reduces many, and most, us included, active real estate investors' tax burden to close to nothing, as long as you're not selling a lot of properties. Let's see, we have a lot of comments. I don't think we have many questions yet so far. So we will move on to equity buildup. This is actually what got my dad interested in real estate in the very beginning, was the advantages of paying down your principal. So whenever you get a loan from a major lender, from a traditional lender, a community bank, a national bank, it'll be amortized, and part of your payment goes to interest, part of it goes to principal. Now, at the beginning, especially with a 30-year amortization, almost all of it's going to go to income, or go to the interest payments, and very little to the principal. But as things go, you start to pay off more and more and more and more principal. The longer you hold that property, the longer you hold that loan, the more principal, the less interest you're paying on it. And what this does is, it basically, especially if you have positive cash flow, you're actually doing better than just that cash flow, because part of your expenses is really just going to paying down the loan. And over the long term, you have the next advantage, which we'll just talk about right now, which is appreciation. The next advantage means that your property is going slowly up in value. Over the long term, 2008, it was not that way, but over the long term, real estate values have gone up about 4% per year, a little bit over, just barely over inflation. And but that's still very good, as we'll get to at the last letter. So your property value is going up like this. Your mortgage starts to go down like this, and you really have this exponential growth in the amount of equity you have in the property if you hold it over the long term. Through the ups, the downs, the economy will go up a little bit, it'll go down some, and then eventually, all of a sudden you realize you have a ton of equity in this property, especially if you're making, and then you got the cash flows just sort of keeps you liquid, the cherry on top. But a lot of properties that, my dad bought in Eugene, Oregon for $45,000, $50,000 early 90s are now worth several $100,000. Properties that we bought in Kansas City, obviously this was at the bottom of the market, 2011, 2012, 2013. Some of them have close to doubled in price. And all the while, your mortgage is, your principal balance on your mortgage is going down. Let's see. So I went over appreciation a little bit there. Again, some people might tell you that the stock market does better than the real estate market in general, and that is technically true. Stocks will generally go up faster than real estate. But when you take in all the other advantages, you get no appreciation advantage. You're not getting, you might get dividends, but you're not getting the consistent cash flow. And you're not getting any equity buildup because there's no loan there. But the big one is leverage. Now, you used to be able to get these, margins on with stocks and whatnot. You can still get them a little bit, but not nearly like you did, say, right before 1929. But generally speaking, real estate, you can. You all know this. You can get a loan on the property, 75, 80% of the value, and then let's say all of a sudden you're instead of it going up on 4% per year, let's say you got an 80% loan. Well, now if you put $20,000 down and your property goes up 4%, well, it's gone up $20,000 on a $100,000 property. It goes up 4%. Now the property's worth $104,000. A $4,000 return on $100,000 is 4%, but a $4,000 return on your $20,000 down payment is a 20% return. It's 5 times more. And so, of course, there's the downside of this is if it goes down 4%, you've lost $20,000 or 20% on your money. But generally speaking, as we've been over, real estate goes up over the long term. Over the course of many years, it will generally go up, and it should consistently continue to be that way. Now, we probably are nearing a peak. It's hard to say. Guessing timing the market is not exactly it's kind of a fool's errand. But over the long run, if you hold it for the next 10 years, in all likelihood, it will go up around 4% a year on average. Now, the big advantage about real estate that most people don't maybe know but can't articulate is actually what most people consider to be his biggest disadvantage. The biggest disadvantage about real estate is that it's illiquid. It's hard to sell real estate. You can easily sell 10 shares of a stock here or 10 shares of a stock there, but you can't just sell your house like that. Right now it's not too bad, but again, circa 2008, there weren't a lot of takers. But this two-edged sword has a massive advantage, and that is that the real estate market is considered inefficient. Now, the stock market is more or less efficient. Warren Buffett had this famous bet that he had with all sorts of different hedge fund managers that he could beat them. I think he bet $1 million on it. And all he did was basically invest in, I think, an index fund. And I think he won hands down. It was a long-term bet, 10 years. Or maybe it was the Dow Jones. I can't remember what exactly he did. But generally speaking, it's very, very hard to beat the market. It can be done if you use like Benjamin Graham techniques and whatnot. But you've got to study it extremely well. Be very, very cautious. And generally speaking, it just doesn't work. There was an analysis of all these different hedge funds or all these different traders for a large stock firm, and they found that their returns on average were pretty much identical to the market if you average it out over the long term. And so stock, the problem is all the information's out there. You can get the 10Ks on these companies. You can go through all their financials. Different investors have looked at this 1,000 ways from Sundays. There's just no real way, especially for a novice, to find a great deal on a consistent basis. But real estate, that's not true because every house is sort of its own market, especially if you buy that property from a motivated seller. If you're buying it, it's on the MLS. Yeah, it's got access. Lots of people have seen it, but even still, maybe it's a large rehab, and you don't, and you have the ability to do that, whereas most people don't or aren't interested. And if you send out letter campaigns or whatnot to maybe people in foreclosure, or people who have a lot of equity, who live out of state, or maybe they've just had an eviction or whatever, probate, something like that. You have the ability to find people who are willing to sell their property at a discount. Especially right now, if you're marketing to people who have, say, they're being foreclosed on or something like that, they're generally going to get inundated with letters. But if you're marketing to people who, let's say, live out of state, own a house that has a large amount of equity in it, you've maybe driven by it or whatnot, it's dilapidated to a degree. I mean, these types of properties, they're not being looked at by a lot of people. They're not on the open market. Oftentimes the owners just want nothing to do with them and are willing to sell them at a discount or offer some sort of creative, financing that makes it more appealing. So that allows you to get, solid discounts. And, we there's the 70% rule that's very common, especially for flippers. We look to be all in for about 75% of the value after the purchase and the rehab. We've usually been about 80%, but that's because we've gone a little bit higher volume. But by getting that, you've not only gotten a large equity position right off the bat. You basically just made a substantial amount of money by purchasing a property. But in addition to that, you've insulated. So your return on your $20,000 right off the bat, if you have, let's say, go back to that deal, it's a $100,000 deal, but it's worth $120,000. Right off the bat, your return on your $20,000 down payment is 100% immediately. But what it also does is it insulates you against losses. And this, as we go into a market that will probably start to decline here in the next year or two, this is absolutely essential for any buy and hold investor or any flipper, especially if you're doing a flip that is a large property. If you're doing a large rehab and by the time you buy it, the market might have turned by the time you look to sell it. Having that large margin is all the more important. As you if the market turns, if you buy a property at market, let's go back to that $100,000 example, you're all into it for $100,000, goes down 10%, you've lost, you've lost half of your money if you put a $20,000 down payment. But if you bought that $100,000 property and you're all in for only $80,000, goes down 10%, you're still up 10%. You still have equity in the property. You haven't really lost anything despite the market collapsing like that. So you can insulate yourself from risk by getting really good deals, as well as getting in a massive margin right off the bat. Let's look at the comments here. So it's I guess it's the ideal, but it's sort of the ideal I, because you have the inefficient quality of the real estate market. We'll look at a few questions here if we can. So Jonathan asks, I have $100,000. What would be the best way to get started in real estate? Well, I think $100,000 is a pretty good place to start. I think a lot of it depends on what your goals are. How fast do you want to grow? If you want to grow very fast, you probably don't want to put a lot of money down immediately. Maybe if you want to be a little bit safer, you could do, say, a BRRRR strategy, depending on how expensive your market is, and not get any loan up front. Use the $100,000 to purchase the property and do the rehab, and then refinance it after the fact. That would mean you save on loan fees, or you save on holding costs by not incurring any of those up front. If you want to be a little bit more aggressive and say buy 2 to start with or something like that, then perhaps look for private lenders to supplement that. Or I don't really like going to a bank for the BRRRR strategy because you would have to get a loan up front and incur all those loan fees. Usually they have at least 1 point, appraisal costs, all that stuff, and then get it on the end when you refinance it. But you could conceivably do that. Also, in this particular market, I would look to buy properties that you could conceivably flip. It's probably a little bit more better of a flipper's market because we're going into because I think again, timing the market is not the easiest thing. One of the best predictors of that is when the yield curve flips, which is a complicated subject I won't go into, but it's pretty much right there. So we've had I think the run right now is the second longest consecutive run without a recession in history. I think we're just approaching 10 years, and the longest is like 10 years and 6 months. So in all likelihood, things will slow down and the market will shift. So I would probably consider the possibility of being of flipping. I would be very much more cautious, making sure if it's a deal that you feel is any way marginal, avoid it. at this point. I'd be more careful about which properties you select. That's one of the key things of real estate. You can invest in a down market. You can invest in a market that's going down. It's not impossible. But it is something that you need to be much more careful about. Those marginal deals, I mean, generally speaking, if it's marginal, you should avoid it. But particularly in a market that seems to be peaking. I'd also make sure that, if you're looking for a flip, you want a property that can cash flow, or at least very close. I mean, when you're flipping a property, it's not important to have a property that's able to cash flow. But when you aren't, because who cares? You're not going to hold it. You're selling it. You're looking for the profit. You're looking for that margin. But there's a higher likelihood that you're going to get stuck with it. So unless you're in a if you're buying in an area, if you're buying in a really high end area where there aren't any renters, okay, this isn't that big of a concern. But if you're buying in an area with a lot of renters and owners, kind of the area that's kind of in the middle between buy and hold and flips. I mean, generally buy and hold, you want to be a little bit lower end area. Flips, you want to be a little bit higher end. I would make sure that you make sure this property can cash flow if you're stuck with it. But yeah, probably, Jonathan, I'd probably lean a little bit more, if you're on the fence between flipping and buy and hold at this time, I'd probably lean a little bit more towards flipping. And it just kind of depends on your strategy, what you're looking for. If you're looking to be aggressive, go ahead and get those private lenders. But at the same time, no matter how aggressive you're looking to be, this is the absolute wrong time to be settling for anything marginal. This is for Basil. I've just bought my first investment property. The appreciation was great last year, but now a lot of new stock has been released and has driven down rental prices. I've now been forced into a negative cash flow position, but my location is still doing well appreciation-wise. Should I ride the appreciation or get rid of a non-cash flowing unit? It's a single family. I mean, it's rare that rental prices go down in a market where the appreciation rate is going up, and so I would be surprised if that's a consistent position. I mean, I would say, I've very rarely seen it. I've sort of seen it now. Appreciation rates in Kansas City are still going up a little bit, whereas rental rates have started to decline. But generally, they're going to move in the same direction. And so I would probably lean a little bit. I mean, I don't like the idea of assuming appreciation. Appreciation is, again, over the long run, you'll have appreciation. But I would say if the property is in a negative cash flow position, and in all likelihood, the appreciation is not going to continue if the rentals are continuing to go down. Now, if you have a large portfolio and this is just one of those properties and you think you have reason, like if the rents, go back to where they were shortly, it will cash flow fine. Yeah, I'd probably hold it. But if the rents have really gone to the point where you're feeding each month, you don't have a lot of properties, I wouldn't rely on that appreciation unless you have a very good reason to think so, like some new jobs coming in, some new property and whatnot. I'd probably, and I hate to say this because I'm a buy and hold guy, I would probably lean towards selling that, but it would be hard for me to make a determination on that without more information. Let's see. I can go back here a little ways. This is from Crypto. What's your opinion on funding your first deal with multiple first-time partners to reduce risk? We generally fund our deals with private lenders. As far as multiple partners, I would try to keep it to one. I mean, the more partners you're dealing with, the more problems you're asking for. It's just more hands in the cookie jar type of thing. More people wanting to do it in different ways. Now, if you're going into a large deal, like in a 100-unit apartment complex or something like that, and you're doing a syndication and bringing in passive investors to be like a part of that deal, then yeah, you might need to get several of them in order to fund it. But with passive investors, they are not in control. I mean, you are the active investor. You're the one making the decisions on the property. They are basically, they're not lenders, but they sort of have the power of a lender. As far as doing these deals, I would try to keep each one, especially if you're doing a house, a duplex, a fourplex, whatever. If you're using a partner, one partner I'd recommend. And if at all possible, if you're going to go be in a partnership where you're sharing equity, I would want to do more than one deal with that person. I wouldn't want to just do one-offs. I mean, maybe in certain cases it makes sense. You're doing like a 12-plex or something like that. But I would generally want to move towards doing, if we're going to do a partnership together, I would like to do, a handful of deals, not just one. You need a new LLC with each person. You got to make all these different agreements. There's a lot of negotiating with partners. There's not much with private lenders. You do it front and then it's done. It's in place, and the only real negotiation is if they want to get paid off after the term is over, or whether they want to renew, or whether you want to pay it off and say refinance into a loan. I would prefer to move. We always prefer private lenders. It gives us a lot more control, and if we're getting a good deal, which we need to do, it gives us a solid equity margin in the property. But with regards to partners, they can make very good sense. But I try to limit the number you're working with, just because it's a lot of negotiations. Every partner is going to feel like they want something out of a deal. Let's see. I'm not this is bank-backed loans have any weird payoff early contentions on average. Well, they stop lending to you once they see this trend. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking there. Generally, banks, as far as early payoff or weird payoff situations, the two things that you're going to commonly see are prepayment penalties and yield maintenance. And yield maintenance is the work of the devil, but it is what it is. Basically, yield like if you have a 5-year loan, the term is 5 years, not the amortization. So most banks will renew after the term is over, but a lot of them have prepayment penalties, or sometimes there's step down prepayment penalties. Maybe you have to pay 5%. You have to pay 5% of the loan if you pay off in the first year, 4% in the second year, 3% in the third year. With yield maintenance, it's basically to make sure that they get all the interest that was owed during the term of the loan. So you pay it off 3 years early, you got 3 years of interest more or less to pay off. If you can avoid it. Now, if you're going to be working with any of these lenders, these sort of that popped up in the last 5-6 years, like Lima One Capital, or I think B2R is gone, A10 Capital. There's a lot of these national lenders that will do single families. They all have this, and it's generally yield maintenance. A lot of lenders and community banks have it. Generally, I've seen it be prepayment penalties with community banks. If you can, get rid of them. If you're looking to hold them long term, it's not that big of a deal. But you want to have options with real estate, especially when we're I think reaching a peak market. You want to have options. Selling the property is one of those options. A prepayment penalty reduces that. Your ability to do that makes it more difficult. So if you can get rid of them, and often goes to negotiation. We've asked banks to remove prepayment penalties, and they've done. Some have said yes, some have said no. So that's something to look into and request. But if you are looking to hold the property long term, if you're looking to hold the property long term, a prepayment penalty is not the end of the world. Okay. And then let's see here. So this is from Plant-Based Nurse. If you're paying a private mortgage for your home, do you think it's smart to start investing? Pay down the debt on your mortgage first? I would say, yeah, why not? I mean, your house in some ways is an investment. In some ways it's not. You're not bringing any cash flow. But if you're renting a house instead of owning one, you'd have to pay your rent still. Mortgage payments are some of the lowest rated debt you're going to see. I mean, the lowest interest rate debt you're going to see. Student loans might be lower, but generally speaking, mortgage debt is about as cheap as you're going to get. You can still, I mean, in many, I own my own house. I'm still investing. I think that's sort of, I wouldn't, I mean, unless you're going for a very conservative strategy. And this is not, like I've mentioned this story before. I think it's in the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. They go through a variety of different investors. They kind of give their backstory. And one was this married couple who would buy a house, pay it all the way down, then they'd buy another house with a loan, pay it all the way down, just one after the next. By the time they were ready to retire, I think they had like 25 houses, no debt whatsoever on all of them. That's great. Very conservative, but very low risk, obviously. I am a little bit more into growing quicker, and so I would recommend you go ahead and buy another property, especially if you get a good deal, get a mortgage on it. I mean, Fannie backs up to 10 mortgages, so why not? I mean, you could even consider, I would say having a mortgage on your own home, unless you really want to go have a conservative strategy with a very low risk, go ahead and continue to invest. I wouldn't prioritize paying off that mortgage unless being extremely conservative is something that you're looking to do. So Javier, auction's a good place to start. Well, there's several ways you can do auctions. I would say tax auctions are a bad place to start because there's a lot of potential problems you can run into. You want to have some good, you want to have done some good research on that. Generally speaking, like with tax auctions, you often don't even have clear title. So you got to do what's called a quiet title action to make sure you have clear title. So I would generally stay away from those. Now this differs by the county, but if you're doing foreclosure auctions, you've got to watch out for tax liens. Because property tax lien or basically any tax, and the government always gets theirs. It always goes on, always is first, and it doesn't get wiped off during the auction. Also, you generally have to buy it for cash. Some places, I've heard of counties where after you've built a reputation there, you can give them like a deposit of 10% or something like that, and the rest of the money within a couple days, a week, depends on the county. But generally, you're gonna have to buy it all for cash. If it's $150,000, you don't have $150,000. It's kind of you're kind of out of luck there. Then there's auction.com, which I think that's auction.com is sort of new MLS of sorts. I mean, you're making auctions, but it's you're bidding on properties and it's going up and whatnot. But it's pretty similar. It's marketed to everyone, and so it's hard to get a great deal on auction.com. There's some good. There's certainly you're probably, I think, bound to get a bit better of a deal than you would on the MLS. But I don't see it being an area to get consistently good deals. So I would say auctions are probably not the best place to start. I'm not saying you can't start there, and I'm certainly not saying that you should never go there, but I don't think they're the best place generally to start. The other issue is a lot of these courthouses, especially for the foreclosure auctions, have this, they got one bully there that just bullies everybody, and generally buys all the properties, or a large number of the properties that are really worth looking at. You'll see a lot of really rundown, junky houses in bad areas that are up for foreclosure. And my general thought is, unless you are a specialist in an area such as that, you should avoid the D-class properties. They look, they're generally cheap. Looks like the cash flow look great on paper, but the costs, the rehab will eat up all of your equity, and then the cost to operate the property will generally be higher than the actual rent it brings in. So I'm generally against that. And then you have this sort of, we call them like the Voldemort figure that will buy that kind of bids up all the properties and tries to bully new people out. So I think auctions are generally a difficult way to start. I probably lean more towards, obviously looking at the easy things. There are properties that slip through the cracks, so the MLS, Craigslist, all those types of things, and then more of a marketing campaign, finding good lists from like ListSource or DataQuick, particularly properties that have a large amount of equity, absentee owners, in areas that you really want to focus on investing. Let's see. Thanks, Jay Hicks. This is awesome. I agree. I agree that this is awesome. Thank you. So let's see. We got any other questions out here? I think we're pretty much okay. This is BJH04A. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. My apologies. But how do you find a private lender? Brand new to this. Thank you. Okay, so this is sort of a tricky question because there's a lot of ways to find a private lender, but the best place to start is basically pretty much anyone with money can be a private lender. Anyone who and a lot of these private lenders, I mean, some of them are kind of love having their money in the stock market. Maybe that's tricky, but other of them have them in savings accounts, checking accounts, and CDs making 0.2% on their money or anything like that. And they really would love a relatively safe way to make a higher return. So the best place to start, I'd say, is twofold. First is put together a brief elevator pitch. This is just a paragraph that would, my name is Andrew Syrios. I'm a real estate investor. We buy properties, rehab them, and then rent them out. Generally buy them with private loans, pay 8 to 9% interest. If that's something that would ever interest you, please let me know. Or in kind of varieties of that too. You're always talking to people. Always make sure that you're telling them what you do, and also hint that you look for private lenders, or that you take out private loans on these properties and pay good returns on them. The second thing is just sit down and then name every person. Just write a list, every person you can think of that might have a sufficient amount of money. Like, start with 10. Like, your goal is to write down 10 names of people you know that might have a sufficient amount of money and might be interested in lending to you. Once you've gotten to 10, can you get to 20? Once you've gotten to 20, can you get to 30? Just see how many names you can get down. Put together a brief prospectus, anything you can, whether it be, just like if you've done any deals before, kind of examples of the deals you've done, your strategy, what is your business plan, what are you trying to accomplish, something that they can walk them through the deal, and then just start calling these people, sending them emails. Don't put a lot of pressure on them, but just ask them, is this something you might be interested in? If so, I'd like to buy you lunch, and then just go from there. So I'd say the main two things is who in your circle, and it might be extended circle, but who in your circle might be interested in this. Just write down a giant list, and then start asking people at lunch. And then also always be, you never know. Somebody you meet might be interested in this. Just make sure that you're talking about what you do, what you're willing, what you can offer. I'm not a fan of high pressure techniques. I don't think they're effective. I think generally you might get people to kind of say, oh, maybe, but then they'll stop returning your calls. You might even hurt a friendship or something like that. But, if you're respectful, you're polite, not using a lot of pressure, and you have something worth offering. And a lot of these people, you have something worth offering. If you're going to offer 8 to 9% on a deal, interest only, or you maybe pay a point or something like that up front, you're offering something that's a hell of a lot better than most of these investments, or most of the things that they have their money in. And that, in many ways, includes the stock market, because the stock market's up and down. Now, you also need to prove that that your investment is safe. Now, part of that is showing, this deal, giving them a trust deed or a mortgage, depending on the state, so they can foreclose on the property if need be, and offering a personal guarantee too. So, you are responsible for any shortfall. Showing them letting them see the property, putting them on as additionally insured. This way, if there's any claim on the property, they would be notified, and they would have the chance to sign off on any money that was received in order to do the rehab. If you're giving the loan before the rehab, you definitely want to comfort them through the process, give them updates of how the work is doing, send them pictures, be in touch with them before and after. You can send them P&Ls, just show how the property is done, because this is something that even after you've gotten the loan, even after somebody has lent to you, you're going to want to make sure, a lot of this is just their comfort level, making them feel as comfortable as possible. Always, pick up a phone, be quick to respond. Don't hide from them, even if it's bad news. Most people are willing to tolerate bad news. It's when you start ghosting them. That's when they start really getting mad. So, again, who in your circle might have money and be willing to do this, willing to lend to you, and have a reason to do so, and a lot of people do. And that's convincing yourself that, yes, you do have a good product, and a lot of people would be interested is important. And also just constantly telling people what you do, going to networking events, going to the Chamber of Commerce, go to your CCI, and go to the RIA group. BiggerPockets is a meetup. You're probably not going to find private lenders there. You're probably going to find people who want private lenders there. But yeah, keep on asking. And I would make one note, just a clarification. Private lenders, we're talking generally just regular individuals who have money and can lend it. I'm not talking about hard money lenders. Hard money lenders will virtually never work on a buy and hold. They're just too expensive. You're usually looking at 12 to 15% interest rates for 3 to 5 points plus other fees. Most of them still require inspections and appraisals. And so you're looking at an enormous number of fees up front, very high interest. If you can get a property cash flow with a hard money lender, you were doing really, really well on the property, not the loan. And so generally hard money loans only work with flips, and even then they take a big chunk of the equity out. There are other ways to buy. If you have money, you can buy it up front, find a partner or private lender, or you could perhaps get seller financing or a subject to, or a contract for deed, or do a lease option. I mean, there's a lot of creative ways. That's not really the subject of this this live stream, but on BiggerPockets, there's plenty of articles on these subjects that you can look into. And Brandon Turner's book on buying houses or buying properties with low or no money down is definitely also worth looking into if this is something that you're concerned about. For Supergrows, it came late. That's all right. This live stream will be released in its entirety for you guys to watch over and over again, as I'm sure it will be a staple of BiggerPockets for the rest of time. Let's see. So this is from Jones. I bought my first residential property at $172,000 6 years ago. Spoke with an RE agent a few weeks ago and told that it could be put on for $250,000. I could walk away with $86,000 after the property sold. Interested in real estate investing? Could this be a good start for me? I mean, yeah. If you already own it, I mean, it's a great start for you. You already made, I count $78,000, but that's a lot of money there. As far as if you wanted to sell if that property is not a cash flowing property, then I'd probably sell it and use that money to buy other properties with because one of the distinctions between properties that are more flippable versus properties that are more holdable is just the price point. As properties get more expensive in value, the rents go up too, but they start to slow down. They don't go up as fast. And eventually it just gets to the point, if you're looking at a $2 million house, it's very rare that you can be able to rent that out to anyone, and especially make any money with it. So the golden area for buy and hold is generally properties in the lower middle to middle. That's kind of the golden range. Actually, this is from the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. I'll just show this to you guys. This is I think this is pretty good. So let's see. Is this if low cash flow or low end properties have high cash flow. Well, at least high cash flow on paper. They usually don't end up working that way. But they're a lot of hassle. They don't appreciate very much. They're hard to sell. When you get up to the high end, the hassle goes up again because high end tenants can be very picky and want everything to be perfect. The liquidity also gets tougher. They do generally appreciate more, but they don't cash flow very well. They don't cash flow generally at all. And so you want the lower middle is the best area for that. But lower middle is not great for flipping because if you have a 30, yes, it's more expensive to rehab a property that's nicer. You're going to use nicer materials, maybe better contractor. So it's going to cost a bit more, but it doesn't go up in a linear fashion. If you've got a $200,000 property, you bought it for $120,000 and it requires a $40,000 rehab, so you're going to be all into it for $160,000. I'm doing this right. You've got a little bit of room there. If you have a $5,000 expense that you weren't expecting, you still you go down from $40,000 margin to a $35,000. Now if you drop that all the way down to a $100,000 house, you buy it for $60,000, you put in $20,000 into it. Okay, an unexpected expense could very well be the same size. As often these houses are the same physical size. It could be a $5,000 expense. It's almost just as likely that you didn't realize you need to replace the HVAC. Well, the HVAC's going to be about the same. I mean, the roof's going to be about the same. Even like the countertops will be cheaper because you're using a Formica instead of like a granite slab. The appliances may be cheaper, but they're not half the cost. Maybe they're 20-30% less. And some of the things are exactly the same. You need to add a closet. You're pretty much paying the same amount. And so you could have that $5,000 expense, and all of a sudden your margin, instead of going from 40 to 35, goes from 20 to 15. You've lost a full 25% of your margin. And Murphy's Law, things that could go wrong generally do go wrong. You should expect it to happen. You should build in a margin when you rehab, a contingency for things you're not expecting. But also in general, it's hard to flip really cheap properties. It's even hard, and you don't want to be in the really cheap even for hold because they don't cash flow. But even you generally, when you're flipping, you want to be in the middle or higher middle. With buy and hold, you want to be in the middle or the lower middle. Okay, so let's see. Do I suggest getting a realtor's license to be successful at this? I think that's, a real estate license can be very useful because you get access to the MLS. That is, and also you can buy off the MLS and save half of the commission because you're getting half of it. But at the same time, it can take a while to get. It takes, I think it's 42 hours in Kansas City, Missouri. You get a Missouri license. You got to pay some fees. You got to pay some fees to hold the property continually. You also have there's some disclosure issues, and you tell everyone that you're a real estate agent, and there could even be some issues with conflict of interest, especially if you could that could be considered as well. So I did not have my real estate license. A lot of real estate investors I know do. I would say it's not necessary. By far the biggest advantage is to get access to the MLS. If that's something that you think is, or if you think you're going to be doing some listing too, like you buying some, list some properties, things like that, that would also be useful. I don't think it's essential. I don't think it's necessary, but especially if you really need access, if you don't have any other way to getting access to the MLS, or you don't have a buyer. Like we have a buyer's agent that we work with who does a lot of that work for us, and he's really good. If you don't have that, then yeah, it makes more sense. I don't think it's necessary, but it might make sense in your particular case. Let's see. This is DMP. Thanks for all the great info. It has been great, in my very unhumble judgment. No, thank you. What are thoughts on house hacking? I think house hacking is great for beginners, especially if you're handy yourself. I've never done it, but one of my friends who is a real estate investor in Poughkeepsie, New York, has done it, I think, now on 8 different houses, all student rentals near Marist College in Poughkeepsie. And he's doing quite well for himself. I think, especially if you're willing to live in a house that's not completely finished and you're handy and can do the work yourself, it's a great way to get started, especially you just go from one to the next. The next is a little bit of a slower process, but it's also a little bit less risk because you are living in the house during the rehab. So basically you have no holding costs. In addition, you're doing the work yourself, so you have lower repair expenses. Although that being said, you do need to think of your time as being worth something. Now, that being said, in the early time, early on in your real estate investing career, your time, money is probably more important than time. And so that makes a lot of sense. As you get later, your time becomes more and more valuable, and you want to start outsourcing that as much as possible. If you have some money to start with, it might be worth just skipping that step. But I think house hacking is very good for someone in a sort of modest means situation who's handy and willing to live in a house that's not finished. I think it's a great way to get started, and I highly recommend it. What do you think about building a home and renting it out? Is that a good way to start? This is build to rent. It can make sense. It very much depends on the market you're looking at. I would say most of the time it does not make sense to build a house to rent. There are exceptions. Student rentals might make sense if you're near a university. My dad is just doing this right now. He's building these massive, absurd houses. There's 6 beds, 6.5 bath. That would generally not make any sense other than the fact they're right next to a university. But with houses, houses generally don't. There are exceptions. They generally don't, but there are exceptions. But if you're looking for building an apartment to rent, that might make more sense, especially if this is sort of the high, it's hard to build C-class apartments. It's just too expensive. It's not worth the time. C-class is generally apartments that are older. But, if you're building kind of the higher end of rents, it can make sense. So I would still say it would be something that you should consider for apartments, not houses. And it really depends on the market. If you're in, if you're in San Diego, I guess it could make sense. I don't know how anybody makes anything cash flow there, but yeah, you just got to look at the local market. Is it something that's going to cash flow consistently? Generally speaking, it's going to need to be apartments. Occasionally, it can be houses, but I would say building a house to rent is tough in most places. Okay, Neologics. Which are the great events, conventions to attend that can offer syndication, how-tos, and scaling? First of all, you should always be attending your local RIA, even though they rarely will go into syndications. IMN offers a large number of conferences. They're all panels, and you can just Google IMN conferences. They have all sorts of ones. I generally attend at least one of the 2 they have on single-family houses, large-scale single-family house investing. They have one in November in Phoenix and one in Miami in May. And they have all sorts of other conferences on apartments, on offices, and most of those are done through syndications or through hedge funds buying them, or large companies. And the information you'll get varies by the panel, but you'll meet a lot of people in the industry. And so that's definitely worth looking into. I'd also check out, obviously the BiggerPockets podcast is great. You can check out Joe Fairless too. He actually just wrote a book on syndicating apartments. That's probably worth checking out. I have not read it myself, but I have been impressed with Joe and have liked his stuff so far. So that'd be worth looking into. I believe he has a conference as well, once a year, like the greatest ever conference or something like that. And I think it's a general real estate investing, but he does a lot of syndication, so that would be something worth looking into. Jay Hicks, going to talk a little bit about subject twos. So subject twos are, what it is subject to, you're buying a property subject to its existing financing. So you're buying the house, you're getting deed to the house, but the person who owned the house previously stays on the mortgage. Technically, this violates the due on sales clause of virtually any mortgage. So the bank could call it due. I've never seen it done, but I have heard of it happening. So you do have to be aware of that. It's probably something you should definitely have, you should definitely have some sort of option to get out of it. Like if the bank does call the loan due, I wouldn't want to just stick that with the previous owner. Like that sucks. You get foreclosed on. I'm sorry about that. You should be able to have enough equity in the property you can sell it, or a bank that you can refinance it with, or a private lender, or some other option out of it. I think with the possibility of the bank foreclosing on a property, you need to have some sort of backup option. Maybe not 100%, but a 95, 99% backup option. But what this does is allows you to buy a property without putting a new loan on it, and this is especially useful right after the crash, when a lot of properties didn't have much equity in them, or you could buy the property without any, especially if it had a good loan on it, really good interest rate when other banks weren't lending. You could buy the property straight up. There's still just take over the mortgage. Very few banks were going to call that. They're just happy the mortgage is getting paid. I think it's less useful right now. There's less instances where that would make sense, but there are still some. And so it's something to keep in mind, and in particular, if this deal might make sense for you to take over their loan. Oftentimes, generally, when people are willing to do this, it's because they're behind. So you have to pay back, cash the loan up, but it's a lot less expensive than getting a new loan on it. And sometimes, if you don't have the option of getting a new loan on it, makes sense. Again, I think subject twos are sort of a thing of the past. They're not completely. There's still options for them, but the consistent, it really made sense some time ago. And there are some articles on BiggerPockets about subject twos as well that I'd recommend taking a look at. We got Angel from New York, Coob fan for life from Texas. We're just all over the place today. So this is from Victory and Shorty. All right. How about living on one side of the condo while you rent out the other side of the condo? Are you referring to a duplex situation with two separate units, or are you talking about renting out a room? I think both of those can make sense. This is basically kind of house hacking or renting out part of your unit. That definitely reduces your expenses. One of the best ways to get started is to buy with an FHA loan. You can buy up to a fourplex. So you buy a duplex, live on one side, rent out the other. Buy a fourplex, live in one unit, rent out the other three. You do have to live there if you're doing FHA, but I can go for any property and doesn't require FHA loans. If renting out several rooms, especially if you don't have not married, don't have kids or something like that, it certainly makes sense. Same with Airbnb your property when you're not there. In the places you're still allowed to do that, which is rapidly dwindling. But yeah, all that sorts of thing that makes sense. I have written an article on buying and holding condos and whether or not that makes sense. I would say, generally speaking, it doesn't. The problem with condos is the HOA kills you. The HOA, your housing association dues, basically, homeowner association dues, is generally, it varies, but it can be, the lowest I've seen is about 100. Most of the ones we have are around the 200 mark. But I saw one that was $7,500 a month, which really, really hurts the cash flow. But there are, it can work. But generally speaking, condos, because that HOA bleeds out all your cash flow. And even though the HOA does pay for some things, it pays for exterior maintenance. It pays for sometimes some of the utilities. it generally doesn't pay for enough, and your rents are going to be a little bit lower because it's a condo. I have seen it pretty rarely that those will work out, but they can. But it's generally tighter, and condos don't appreciate as well generally. Using the word generally a lot. There are exceptions. If you're in if you're in Manhattan, if you're in San Francisco, I mean, there's a lot more condos there. It might make more sense to do so. But condos are generally tough. But renting out your own unit, renting out a bedroom or something like that, or I mean, situation dependent, but definitely can make sense. So we got any more? So this is from Vince. What are my thoughts on buying ex-grow operations? Is it worth the energy for such low cost? So this is for like cannabis and marijuana. Unfortunately, I'm not in. Missouri has not legalized marijuana yet. I think they did just legalize medical. But if you're in a state, on a side, if you're in a state that has legalized marijuana, buy warehouses. They get a lot more popular. I think in Denver, after they did that, warehouse just skyrocketed, vacancies went away and whatnot. I as far as the economics or whether I could recommend buying one or buying one that's used to be used as one, unfortunately, that's not a topic that I'm an expert in at all, and I'd have to recommend you go elsewhere. I'm sure somebody on BiggerPockets has done that. Posting the forums is probably the best way to get an answer on that. Let's see. We got Jacek. I'm not sure, from Poland. Nice. We got all around the world. I know I butchered your name. That's sort of my MO. My apologies. This is from Vince. What is grown illegally and buy and renovate it? I don't think marijuana is. I've never come across a property like that. I don't think I'd be that concerned about marijuana. I mean, it's like I think that would be pretty easy to just dismantle that area and get rid of it. I don't think growing marijuana leaves like dangerous residue. Now, meth, on the other hand, is very bad. It needs to be abated, like moon suit type thing. Usually, I think I just get rid of it. It prevents paint from adhering to the drywall, and it's toxic. So you got to like rip out drywall in the area that has been done. And meth abatements can be very, very expensive. And if you know meth was done on a property that you're looking at, you need to drop that price substantially. And if you're new, I'd probably just avoid it. As far as marijuana, I haven't come across that. I'd definitely do more research if I did come across that. I don't believe that it is a noteworthy concern. So this is from. So what can I do if I don't want if banks don't want to give you any more loans to buy properties? Well, yeah, generally when you get 10 loans that are backed by Fannie as an individual. After that, they'll stop basically securing those, and you run out of. It's tougher to get loans. It's kind of one of the first hurdles you have as a real estate investor. By far, the place I would look, one, banks is a broad term. There are a lot of banks out there. Community banks are definitely your best shot for for getting financing on single families or small multis as an investor. You will very rarely have luck with the large banks, U.S. Bank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, etc. And so you want to look at your local community banks. And there are a lot of them. And some will just say absolutely not. Some will say maybe and then no. Some will say yes. One of the things I like to do, a couple things. One, go to your local RIA and ask around. Who have they been using? If they're lending to investors that are like you, doing what you do, yeah, sure, they'll lend. They're more likely to lend to you as well. I also, a little trick, go to ListSource. I look for properties that have loans on them made in the last year. And the price point that I'm interested in the area I'm interested in. And then I just look for any banks that kind of show up, more than once or twice. Because if they're lending in those areas, to non-owner occupants, it's got to be to non-owner occupants. If they're lending to investors in those areas at those prices, well, they're lending to people like you. And so then I just call up all those banks. We found several banks that way. So those are some tips. One, don't give up on banks just because a few banks turned you down. Especially when we were out here right after the recession. I mean, we were in 2012 and thereabout. Nobody wanted to lend to us, but we eventually found one. I mean, we were turned down over and over and over and over and over again, and finally found, two banks, and then eventually it really got better around 2015. We started finding many. Now we're at like 12, 13 banks. So don't give up just because the bank. But if you can't get any bank loans, there are other options. Of course, there's creative financing, seller financing, subject tos, lease options. If you're looking to sell the property, I'm not a fan of lease options though. Private loans, often private loans the interest rate will be too high for a long-term hold. But if you're selling the property, that's not a problem if you're going to flip it. There's sometimes, especially if it's like family, you can get a really good interest rate, and maybe it's worth just holding for the time being. Partners, if you can find a partner, again, I don't like lots of partners. If you can find one good partner, maybe two, depending on how many deals they'll do with you. Especially if you go to a bank and they're willing to put their name on the loan, which really probably needs to be part of that partnership agreement. You do the work, they bring the money. Both of you bring the credit. If they have really good credit, lots of income assets and whatnot, that strengthens your loan request substantially. So that's a possibility. Or if they have the money, you don't even need a loan in the first place. And then if you have your own house and a lot of equity, you consider taking out a home equity line of credit. Maybe that could buy an investment property. You could use that to fund your investment properties. So there are a lot of options like that, from creative financing to private lenders and partners and whatnot. But I think eventually you do need to get banks to lend to you. And generally speaking, the best bet for you, especially after you've used up those 10 Fannie loans that you can get, is community banks, local banks, and especially local banks who are lending to other investors. So that's the area I'd look. And don't accept one or two no's. You might have to get a lot of no's before you can finally get a yes. Yes, ListSource. I think it's listsource.com, but if you look for ListSource, they have all sorts of lists and information you can buy, whittle it down and whatnot. So that would be a good place to look. DataQuick, and there's some other ones too that you can look through. Let's see. This is going back to the marijuana thing. There were humidity issues like mold and the stigma around it. I think stigmas, especially if it's a long-term hold, generally they'll fade away. If you had a quadruple axe murder at a property, that might take a little bit longer. But if the stigma is going to prevent other people from buying it, in a year or two, people are going to forget about that. So I wouldn't be too concerned in that area. As far as mold issues, yeah, that's just another expense you've got to deal with. If there's mold there, you got to tear it out or at least kills the area and make sure that there's no more moisture getting in. The biggest problem with mold is not getting rid of it. Generally, if it's just a little bit there, you can usually put kills on it and whatnot, encapsulate it. If there's a lot, you got to tear out the sheetrock. But that's not that big of an expense. The biggest problem is making sure the water doesn't come back. Why is there water getting in there and causing the mold to be there? So run that down, figure out what the situation is, and then just add that expense to it. I wouldn't be hugely concerned about the stigma. Not for growing marijuana. If somebody's doing it illegally there, I don't think that would last. It's just people just don't care enough, and they got enough going on in their lives. So this is one last one. How are we finding our deals? The numbers don't work on anything in the MLS anymore. Yeah, that's mostly true. Back in the good old days, back around 2012, 2013, the vast majority of our stuff was off the MLS. We'd go out and look at 15 properties, make offers on 13, 14 of them, and buy 2. We just do that over and over and over again. Then we got into met with some portfolio deals, and we haven't been buying as much since, kind of working through those, as well as some apartments. I would still look at the MLS. I would still look at Craigslist. Eventually, sometimes stuff falls through the cracks. Definitely get in with your local wholesalers. You want to be if you can move to be the number 1, number 2 person for a wholesaler, that's the real key place to be, because they generally will call you, call their go-to people first before they start sending out those email blasts we're all familiar with. And so that's getting in with the wholesalers. Auctions is something you might want to look into. There's also, you can, but probably direct marketing is the most effective way. We have a partner in Indianapolis and a partner in Emporia, Kansas, who are very active right now. We're not quite as much so. And they're using direct marketing, and I think they're mostly focusing on out-of-state absentee owners, or at least absentee owners with properties that have a lot of equity in them, that haven't taken out a loan recently. And a lot, some of these people don't care. They got their property, it's cash flowing. What do they care? They just throw your letter in the trash. Others will be, they're sick of this thing. Oh, if I can get rid of it, I don't have to deal with getting it listed and dealing with a bunch of offers and, waiting and just, maybe having the tenant leave or something, or maybe there's no tenant there. Just so I can just get rid of it quickly. That's great. And you can get good deals that way. But, and then of course, marketing to people in foreclosure. That's like, that was like Russell Whitney stuff from 15 years ago, or Carlton Sheets or something 25 years ago. It's still worth doing probably, but they are going to be inundated with letters, and then there's other different lists that you can look into. But I would say marketing, direct marketing is still the most is the most effective way to find deals now, as the MLS has not completely, but definitely for the most part in most areas dried up, and there's just not much there anymore, other than the occasional one that slips through the cracks. But we are going over an hour here, so I don't think I've gotten through most of the questions. I think I'll call it a day. I appreciate all of you coming in and joining me today, and have a great evening. And I guess you got Friday tomorrow, but have a great weekend after that. And I think I'll be back next week. But if not, have a fantastic Christmas and New Year's. Thank you all, and have a good one.